Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of Outside the Valley, the podcast where we interview remote startup leaders, remote workers, remote work advocates, and companies who thrive outside of Silicon Valley. This is a podcast where remote companies share what works and what doesn't so you can do it right. Outside the Valley is brought to you by ARC, the remote hiring platform that helps you hire remote software engineer and teams easily, on demand, just like that. I'm your host, Jovian Gautama. Today, I'm joined by Ho Yin Cheng. Ho Yin is based in Hong Kong, and he is the founder and CEO of Remo, the tool that helps you organize virtual events and office space. Ho Yin is also the founder and CEO of Riotly Social Media, an Instagram social media agency that helps you manage and increase the exposure and engagement of your Instagram. We discussed the challenges Ho Yin faced when he began transitioning to be a better remote startup leader as his company transitioned to be a remote first company. We also talked about how his perceptions about remote hiring have changed. In the beginning, he started hiring remotely just to cut costs, a very pragmatic reason. But now he realized that it's more than that. It's about enabling yourself to hire different talents from around the world. We also talked about how his tool, Remo, helped provide the right amount of transparency for remote teams. Ho Yin also generously shared with us the spreadsheet template that he used to track his transition to make Remo a better remote first company. Since we recorded this episode, Remo has organized several virtual webinar events, and they have more events coming up, so you can also check it on the show notes or on the ARC blog post. Okay, without further ado, let's start the episode. Here is Ho Yin Cheng from Remo. Here we go. Ho Yin, how's it going?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Great, awesome. Thank you for coming to the show. So just to start everything, can you share a bit more about your own journey and your experience as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. I guess it's like a little intro. So I started off as an entrepreneur in Hong Kong. Did a lot of different things. I have like an e-commerce business. Did a mobile marketing agency, and then most recently, right now, it is a sort of like a SaaS solution for small, medium businesses to grow their Instagram and social media. And this company is called Riotly Social Media. And then since the beginning of the year, we've been starting to work on a new project, which is called Remo. And Remo is essentially a virtual office video first platform for remote and distributed teams. It's sort of like an immersive 2D map that allows you to talk and easily communicate with your teammates, trying to solve problems like loneliness, social interaction with others. And so this is kind of like the project that I've been focused on right now lately.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you're building a tool for remote workers and for the remote industries. Can you share a bit more? How was the transition like before? Because your previous product, Rightly, is pretty different from Remo. Can you share a bit more what made you think that, or made you interested in the remote work industry?
Yeah, so I actually had a remote team for quite some time, and I actually didn't know really what remote work was. It wasn't, I hired a team from the Philippines, more of as like a cost, effective strategy, rather than really thinking about it from like, oh, hey, this is really for remote work. And so I had a remote team pretty much like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, starting off with a team in the Philippines. And then it wasn't until like about 2 years ago that I started to read more about what remote work was and learning about companies like Zapier and Automatic, that I started to realize that remote work was actually a thing. Like it was actually something that people really were pushing for. And so I went to Running Remote, this conference that was for people who are leading remote teams. And that's when I started to like really dive into and really like think that, hey, maybe remote working is something that is like a trend that would be a trend for the future. And it was at that point where I started to think about like how I was running my remote team. So it wasn't until probably like last year when I was running my remote team and I was scaling it that I started to kind of face a lot of challenges while scaling it. And so I looked at those challenges and tried to figure out how to resolve them. And that's kind of how Remo really came about, was really solving
Right.
a lot of our own challenges.
Right. So how big is your team now?
25.
25. And how many of them are remote?
Right now, about 20 of them are remote.
All right. And so 5 of them are based in Hong Kong?
Yeah, 5 of them are, yes.
Right. Cool. So just to backtrack a little bit. So at that time you mentioned you just started to, there's an increased interest from you about the whole remote work thing, right? Um, what fascinates you the most about remote work at that time when you just start like going deep into it? Like some people are fascinated by the work-life balance that it brings or the flexibility. What about you?
I think for me at the beginning when I first started, I would say it would be split into 2 phases. Like the first phase was that it was very cost effective. That
Mm.
was the first reason why I chose it. And then when I kind of learned more about remote working, the second phase was more about like I realized that you can get a really huge talent pool, um, and in Hong Kong we have talent, but it's hard to get,
Right.
and expensive. And so it also was a cost measure, but also that you could get more for the same price.
Mm.
And that was really, really attractive. So it was talent. And then second really is that I started to realize what big of an impact that remote work had on my employees' lifestyle and the way how they live, and the way like the fact that they can work at home and take care of their family or take care of a
Yeah.
sick family member, which a lot of my employees have, or take care of like their children, or maybe their sister's children or whatever.
Right.
There's this element of being able to do more with your life by working remotely. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I see that as like a liberating, you're just liberated by basically by remote working.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that because a lot of startup founders or CEOs in the beginning, a lot of them, they start on the first phase, those pragmatic way of thinking. I hire remotely because it's cost effective, it's cheaper and whatnot. But when they go deep into it, it's absolutely just more than that. It's not even only talent, but it's also having a more productive team because they're happier, being able to take care of their family and friends and whatnot. So
Right.
yeah, I've seen a lot of leaders that came from the same position as you. It starts from a very practical side of things, and then you realize, hey, this is more than just that. So another follow-up question: you mentioned as you are scaling, there's a lot of challenge that you faced, and I guess for yourself, and also noticed from your previous podcast interviews, you went through this transition phase to be a better leader for your remote team members, so to speak, right? um i I would guess that's a lot of work that you need to do yourself there. What was the transition like, and what was the challenges?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of challenges in maturing myself, or my as I try to mature as a leader. I think one of the critical things that I learned most was that you really have to show empathy, and you have to assume that the people that you hire, assuming that you hire well, are doing what's best and not doing what's worse. So I had a lot of times where like when somebody wouldn't. I had a time when like this girl, she wasn't able to do this task that I did. It was like a research task that was quite repetitive, and she would just do a really, really bad job. And my first instinct was like, oh, you're lazy, you're not doing your job, or whatnot. And your first instinct is to think kind of like the worst of people. And And I think that was something where it's very easy to do that because you're not in front of them. You don't know. You don't know where they are. They don't communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So you just assume the worst because you just
Right.
can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've basically kind of like yelled and been really pissed off at people. There's one girl that I yelled so much that I made her cry. And she kind of, yeah, I've made that. I'm definitely not proud of it, but I've definitely made a number of people, very unhappy and very in a very emotional way. And I kind of slowly realized that that's actually not really the truth. Like I might be angry about something. It turns out that, well, she's actually she had trouble with it's always some other reason. Like she had
Right.
trouble with her internet connection, or she had trouble with doing this or doing that. So it's a lot about like trying to figure out what are the problems first before kind of assuming the worst in people. And but this is assuming that you hire correctly and you have the right processes in place to make sure that they are doing, you can see that they are doing some work
Hmm.
and building up that trust initially. And so that was one thing that I learned a lot, was you just have to ask questions first, figure out what's wrong, and then figure out what is an excuse and what is like an actual real reason, and
Okay.
whether they're repeatedly kind of not able to do the tasks that was assigned to them. And if
Mm-hmm.
they're repeatedly not able to do, then you can start assuming the worst and then start being more aggressive in the way how you do stuff. So for example, at our company, we have a process where we ask questions, figuring out what's wrong, making sure that we have supported them as much as we can to succeed.
Got it.
And we ask them all the questions, like, do you guys have any issues? And we say that multiple times, like, do you have any challenges? Do you have any issues? Multiple
Mhm.
times. And then if they still don't improve, then we say, look, we've tried to support you as much as we can. Is there anything else that we are unable to support you with? And if they say no, then we say, okay, well, it looks like you have a challenge here and I'm not sure. So right now I can only assume that you are unable to do your work or you are not really committed. So now we have to take it to the next step, which is, if we want to keep this person, by the way, if
Yeah.
most likely at this point, we probably won't want to keep them. We
Mm-hmm.
would have already said, hey, you know what, maybe we're not the right fit. And we would kind of like end that relationship.
Yeah, I think especially when you're a remote team, right? Trust is literally everything. So, you also mentioned that, based on what you said, the key of everything here is you hire the right people, right? Hiring correctly. So, as you transition to be a more remote-friendly company, or you are a remote company right now, right?
Right.
Now, which means that these people that you hire, you're not only hiring contractors anymore, you're also hiring remote core team members, people
Right.
that you want to have a lot of interactions with and want you to trust to, how to say it, to apply themselves and help the company to go to the better direction. Is
Right.
there any adjustment that you made in your hiring process? Because now it's much more important.
Yeah. So the way how I do it now is it's all like test based. So
Okay.
we test them for actually tasks that they would do.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically test them for the job. Like if
Right.
the job is that they had to write emails and pitch to people, we just get them to write emails to pitch to people. If the right now, like we're hiring for someone to help us like organize events,
Mm-hmm.
online events for our conference platform, which I'll talk about later. So we actually get them to do it. We actually get them to
Right.
organize the event. So because from a remote working perspective, like all you care about is really the results. Like you don't, it in some ways, remote working, it focuses really on results, because it's not about how well you interview. It's not about how well you dress. It's not about, it almost, and actually in some ways, it's not about how well you get along with your boss, like from
Right.
like a friendship standpoint, right? Sometimes you might meet someone, you interview them, you're like, oh, we kind of connect well. And that might give you some bias. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't connect. I'm just saying when you do a remote interview, it's a bit more difficult to connect. So that
Right.
element is kind of removed. So you really, really just evaluate that person's communication skills and their ability to do whatever the task that's required. And so we do a take-home test. So we give them like
Mm-hmm.
a list of tasks that they need to do. to test like their ability, and that itself already evaluates like how much that they want the job. So we
Right.
only, the people that say, oh, I don't need to do this test because I have so much experience, then it's like, okay, great, we're probably not the right fit. And that, because people, if they put effort in the test, it shows a lot. It shows that they really, really are serious, and they're not just, it just shows commitment. And I like that. And then the next level is we do some interviews. And the third part is we do a 1 week trial, paid 1 week trial. In some cases, it might be a 1 or 2 day that's not paid, but for some of the core members, it's definitely paid for 1 week. And the 1 week trial for me is probably like the most effective way. It's not scalable, but it's very effective. I've pretty much been like have been able to not have anyone leave after I started this process. Like, it's just so effective for me. I know that person really, really well within that 1 week. Not super well, but I'm saying like I know quite well how they work within that 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm very confident to say like, okay, I know how you work. Then we can start working. It's just, you would never buy a car or buy a computer without test driving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or date around or marry someone without test driving. So I
Right.
feel like you should definitely do that for key employees or core team members.
Right. And how long is the usual hiring cycle, especially for core team members?
I mean, it's a bit longer, I have to be honest. Like it's around about like maybe a month to month and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the interesting things is that we've been able to kind of optimize that process, and we've been able to like get the process down where people come in and they just do the tests, and then we start the 1 week trial. So we can get someone in within like 2 months if we can. What I would say is the only reason why that this kind of works is because right now there's a lot more people that want to work from home than people who want to hire remote workers. So from an employer perspective, you get a lot of talent, and you can basically go from target the entire world. So that helps tremendously in the speed of hiring.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of normal for remote companies to have more than 1 month hiring cycle. I've seen that other companies like TextJar, they're based in Boston, and I know Help Scout or even Zapier, they have really long hiring cycles, just because that it makes more sense to be more careful, when you're hiring remotely. And you have this like skin in the game approach where you work with these people for a couple of weeks or almost a month, and to figure out how they work. Yeah, I think it's pretty common, and I think that's a lot of.
Well, if it depends on how you calculate like the hiring cycle, right? Because a lot of these companies, they will start a freelance contract first, like for 1 month. And then after the 1 month, then they offer something more permanent and more real. We do the same thing. After that 1 week, we also have another 1 month freelance contract as well. So it's actually not 2 months. Like, it could be extended to 3 months easily because of that 1 month trial. It's a freelance contract. And then after we evaluate them within the month, then we make the call.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So going back to more like on the team management side of things and communication side of things. So I've listened to on one of your previous podcasts, I think it's the one with Run Remote. You mentioned that you are a very operational person. You like to do things very hands-on, right? Setting up Zapier or write some codes and whatnot. However, I think when you are transitioning to be a remote team, you have to play the CEO role a bit more, like, the company vision and those kind of leadership role, like big picture things. Was that a challenge for you to transition from this more operational role to more, how to say it, like high up, so to speak?
So, I mean, from the perspective of Riley, which is where a lot of the growth and the scaling came from, I would definitely say that yes, it was challenging to get less operational and more high level. I think honestly, like for me, the only reason how I was able to get away from like doing so operational stuff is I just didn't have enough time. Like I just had not enough time to kind
Got
of
it.
take care of everything.
Mm.
And one of the things that I really did really well, I think I do relatively well, is creating kind of SOPs and
Okay.
processes. So I do that relatively well. So I create the right processes and get all that stuff down
Mm.
in order to scale myself so that I don't have to look at all that kind of thing. So Zapier is a good example of that. Like Zapier, like I don't mind creating all the Zaps, because you do it once and because you know what the
Right.
process flow is, you do it once and it's pretty much done and set. So that stuff is stuff that like I enjoy doing. But kind of slowly not doing that. Initially, like it was just because I just didn't have time. Like I just, it was more of like I was forced into giving up a lot of that stuff. Yeah. For me personally.
Right, got it. It's interesting you mentioned that you like building SOPs and processes, because a lot of startup founders that I know, they actually hate processes, you know what I mean? And a lot of them actually had trouble when they transitioned from a smaller startup, a nimble and agile startup, to a medium stage one where they need more process and they just absolutely hate it. And it's interesting that I feel like in your case, this is a superpower for you actually. Like you like design the process and then let everyone do it, so
Yeah.
that's super interesting actually.
Yeah. I think for me, like the way how I see it is like I see it in a way where like when I do things manually, I always love to do things manually.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I develop the process, it's like I'm starting to hand it off to someone.
Got it.
That's how I see process. I see
Right.
process as we're now at the next stage of scale and I can now hand it off to someone. So I need to create the process to give to that person. Now, I think like if you were in a remote company, like if everybody worked at the same place, that training would be done side by side. Like I would have, hey, person A or, friend, like I need you to do this. So I'm going to teach you right now, blah, 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 blah. But so I just took that. I do basically the same thing, very similar. And what I do is I bring someone in and I teach them, but I record my entire screen while I'm like teaching them. And then after that, I then tell that person and say, hey, you watch this video, you learn it. And that is the process.
Right.
And then we use the video as basically the process.
Got it.
We use the video as a process because when you train someone, right? When you train the next person, all you need to do is just show them the video.
Right.
And then they do it. And if the process changes, you just re-record it as it is.
Right.
So what we've done at this scale, when I talk about like SOPs, like it's not an actual document. It's actually not a document. It's actually a video recording. And the reason why is because people, when you show it to them in a video, the learning rate is much faster. It's super fast. And you can follow along and people can pause and start. And the other great reason why video is so great is that you can, when you teach someone something for the first time, I mean, what percent do you think the average person is going to be able to absorb?
True.
It's probably maybe 50% at most, right? Of what you said. So they need to go back and review it anyways. And so that's why I like using products like Loom to do that kind of recording.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Loom is amazing. I also use it from time to time. And I think this is a really smart way to approach it, because now I realize that a lot of people that I know that hate processes, they actually not necessarily hate the process, but they also hate the documentation of it, right? Oh, I need to spend time writing that. But if you start with just, recording a video, and you can still delegate, hey, I record this video, and then ask someone, can you create a written version of it?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a much easier way. You could even say, here's the video, and you train someone. And you tell that person, after you train them, you say, please write the documentation of that video and give it back to me. I've done this before. Get it back to me and I review it. Then it's like they're just translating the information onto a piece of paper.
Right.
But the reason why I don't like documents yet, like processes yet, is because our processes are still in flux. So recording video is just, it's just so easy. Like it just takes 5 minutes, like literally, or the amount of time that you need to do for that process, and you can talk through it. So
yeah, and recording video, it's in a way some kind of like magical. It's some kind of like high fidelity communications, right? It's
Yes.
not
Yeah.
only written documents. So I interviewed CEO of a startup called Yak Chat. So they basically are like voice communication tools for remote teams. And it's amazing to see like when you move out from the written form of communication, things are just can get easier if you know how to do it well, and it just opens like different how to say it, different possibilities or different feelings for your remote team. People feel closer and whatnot when you move out from the written form, Slack and so on. So right, still around the before we move on to our next topic, still around the how to say it, the topic of communication. When you're transitioning, to be a better leader, to be a better communicator, so to speak, is there any top resources that help you to go to that place? Any recommended books, podcast episodes, or blog posts?
To be a better leader.
Yeah, when you're transitioning to be a better, remote leader.
Yeah, like so Workplace List has like a module
Mm-hmm.
that is a whole module about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Workplacelist.com. That place is actually pretty good. In terms of books, like Lisette Sunderland has like has a good book about that type of stuff. Laurel Fair, like she's definitely one of the major kind of, I guess, I don't know if it's an influencer, but a major player in terms of like remote work and
Mm-hmm.
communication. She's pretty good. That's specific for remote leadership and communication, not for
Got it.
general though. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Now I want to talk more about Remo. Is it the full name is Remo or just Remo app or
Remo. Yeah. Remo.
Remo? So yeah, can you elaborate more about Remo to our audience again?
Sure. So Remo is, it's really hard to describe in words. I usually at this point I would show a video. Maybe you can like put a YouTube link there. I can send you and you can take a look at it. But
Sure. Yeah.
imagine The Sims, the game The Sims. The Sims is 3D and people kind of walk around and stuff like that. Imagine that, except it's 2D and it's like a top-down map of like a building, kind of like an architecture drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And people are represented by circles. And in each circle, it's like that person's face. And you can double click and you can go into any room that you want. And the moment that you walk into that room, you can turn on your audio and video and you can talk to the people in that room immediately, just in that room. So you can kind of think of it as like a Skype on steroids, sort of like a chat roulette
Mm-hmm.
for work, kind of. And the biggest difference of what we're trying to solve is several things. One is that when we talk about work and we talk about meetings, or we talk about like how people communicate, people do their work and then they have a meeting and then they do their work again, and
Right.
they'll go to lunch and they'll eat lunch with their colleagues, or people will walk around in meetings and have chats, hallway chats and all kind of stuff. That's what a normal in an office look is like. But when it comes to a remote work, you've got work and then meetings, and then you don't really have anything else. And
Right.
so and what you also don't have is you're also in a box, like inside one room in your own office, and you don't see anybody else. So there's no extra verbal hallway communication, and there's no visual communication. Like I can't see someone that's actually there, like their back, for example, and you can't see it. So what we're trying to solve is, number one, is the feeling of togetherness, the feeling that we all are here together, and that this is our home, like this is our office. And using one common visual map as a visual language foundation where, we can all kind of say, oh, let's go to the Game of Thrones room and point
Right.
at things that we all kind of know and see. So number one is presence. Number two is the fact that like it's because of the reduced amount of social communication, people get either lonely or they get isolated or they don't feel as a team. And and there's no like social kind of elements to it to kind of like work, or it's just literally just work. Like you're literally just sitting at your desk doing your work and then having meetings.
Right.
So we're trying to solve that. And the third final thing is like the ability to talk to someone immediately, right? And when you're in like the office, you can do that. You can just tap somebody on the shoulder. You can just immediately and just turn around and say, hey, I have this question to your colleague right next to you, to get feedback, to whatever. But it's really hard. It's a huge barrier when you do that when it comes to a remote work.
Right.
And so we want to lower that barrier of entry for people so that they can easily enter into high quality, high resolution communication easily, and not just talk through voice or just talk through text, which in relative aspects is relatively low quality communication. It's very one dimensional. There's a lot of things you can miss just by text alone. And so those are the things that we're trying to solve.
Right. I think in general, a lot of remote companies trying to tackle this problem with, the combination of Zoom, Slack, and probably there's another employee experience person that organize, a beer meeting or let's watch a video together meeting. I'm not sure. How is it different from that? How is Remo different from that?
So let's talk about let's talk about Slack and Zoom first, and then you can tell me what else I need to compare to, which other ones I need to compare. So Slack is text-based. It's just text-based. And so that's number one. Like there's a lot of back and forth that happens when you're on Slack. There's a lot of times when I use my product where like I just want to talk to someone else. I just call them, or I just go to a room and ask them a question. And that saves you a lot of time of that back and forth. That's number one. Number two is that misunderstanding. And number three is the amount of time you have to spend typing things. I mean, text chat has a place in communication. All I feel, or what we feel at Remo, is text shouldn't be used for everything.
Right.
It should be used for some things, but it can't be one size fits all. I think there's certain situations where you should be changing it up to different mediums in order to convey feelings, be more persuasive, give feedback, do more things that are more, that require more of a human kind of touch to it. Right. So that's number one. Zoom is great for meetings, and it goes back to like what I was talking about before, which everyone does meetings and work.
Well, got it. Yeah.
But Zoom doesn't tackle everything else. It doesn't do anything else aside from that 30 minutes of meetings. When you go to a Zoom meeting, I know some people that do a really great job, that they're like, oh, hey, how's it going? How's the family? Blah, blah, blah. They get to a chat, which is normal when you work at like an office, right? And you have those conversations. But in remote work, a lot of people don't do that, don't know how to do that, feel shy. They haven't developed that close enough rapport beforehand to be able to ask those type of questions. There's a lot of gap, and a lot of that stuff doesn't necessarily happen there, and therefore it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess with the visual, with the visual aspect of Remo, actually when I first saw you guys, I saw that, hey, this is actually super interesting because they add the playfulness essence on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not all about work. I know this will sound like a very salesy, I'm supporting, but that's just genuinely what I felt when I first
thank you.
saw your product on your website. So yeah, I just found the idea fascinating. So currently, now you guys are developing this for use mostly for internal communications or remote work. Any other surprising use cases that you've found people are using it for that you never thought of? Because in my mind, there's a lot of different things with this.
Yeah. Before I answer that, I do want to mention one other thing about remote work is, I think there's a lot of ways to do remote work. Every company kind of does it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And I think what at Remo, what we believe remote work is that remote work needs to have that human element to it.
Right.
We believe that for remote work to be adopted by more people, it needs to be more accessible. Like it needs to be more like real work and have that social element rather
Right.
than not.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs to have that presence and that ability to connect with people very, very easily. And that's what's core to Remo. It's more about the human experience between people, how to develop connections. And my belief is that the future of work isn't remote work and everybody just works by themselves.
Right.
The future of work is you're able to connect with people at a very, very high quality way and very easily socialize with them, just like in an offline environment. And if just using text or just using audio or even just video without anything else, that alone will not be I believe will not just by itself be able to solve the future of work or be the future of what remote work is. And just kind of like a final point, the reason why we've developed Remo is because what a lot of people view remote work is that it's either 0 or 1. It's like either I come in and I don't know anything, or I'm like fully remote and I work by myself in my room. And for someone who's worked remotely or has someone who's not worked remotely, they worked in a co-located location with others, I think that's too big of a jump. I think that's way too big of a jump. It's like telling a basketball team, oh, hey, go play football. I mean, like the first thing is the coach can't even yell across the field to tell you what to do. I mean, there's such a big distance. I mean, I think that's like a really kind of like something you can compare to. That's like the biggest thing. And so what we believe at Remo is we don't claim to say that this is the right way to remote work. We say that this is like 0.2. This is like 0.4. It helps people get into the idea of remote work, something that's familiar with what they've been doing already. And how do you slowly kind of sink into that remote work environment while retaining some of these social aspects, rather than just cutting off all those social aspects and expect people to be okay with that. And I think that might work for some, but I don't think it works for everyone.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically you're saying that going forward, you can see Remo being promoted or being used for even other like broader use cases other than internal team management, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So that brings up a good question. So like we started to kind of host events now. We developed internally. We use the product a little bit differently too. We experiment with it, and one of the ways we did use it is for like happy hours and networking. So we set up a time and we say, hey guys, we're gonna have you have a happy hour, and people would just kind of organize amongst themselves into different rooms and talk. And they kind of jump into from room to room, and then they do that. So we started to say, hey, why don't we do this for networking? And so we created a similar platform where it's just strictly to help people to come together to network. So it's kind of like webinar plus networking.
Right.
And we did this for the Remote Work Summit, where it had 10,000 people go to that summit. And we basically had a lot of spaces having people in. They come in, they network across the different tables, turn on their audio and video, and then they listen to like a discussion. So we've literally 100% basically mimicked an offline conference experience online. And when we did this, the response was really amazing. And so this is something that we've seen as like another use case for our platform.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that. You know, like you mentioned, like an offline event, there are several speakers that's currently speaking, and you can just hop on from one room to another to see which topics interest you the most.
Right. That's right.
And if you don't like it, then you just leave.
That's right.
So currently, you know, I feel like Remo is in a way, how to say it? It's quite innovative in a way. I mean, the essence itself is not exactly new, as in like it's just communication, right? Better communication, but it's like innovative in a way that you present it, you know, using it for webinars and whatnot. Have you ever met any challenge when you are marketing Remo itself? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the biggest challenge, I think, is that people need to come in and experience it with a group of people in
Makes
order
sense.
for
Yeah.
them to feel the full kind of the aha moment. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a big challenge. It's a
Mm-hmm.
big challenge to get people in, and it's a big challenge to get other people to come in and to kind of get that feeling, to get that sense that, oh, this is how it's like.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one big challenge. And I think the second biggest challenge is that it's a hard thing to describe. Like, it's not easy to describe this to people and to make them feel excited about it, because it's an experience product. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a product where you have to experience in order to kind of get it. So, you know, our the way how we try to kind of pitch this product is we try to like make it as we use video a lot. You know, we basically use video a lot to try to
Right.
explain the product to people.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense. I totally agree with you. When I first see Remo, it looks cool, but I think to fully appreciate it, I probably need to be there, in a certain event, for example, or use it fully with my team to actually appreciate the whole experience of it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I can see that. So you mentioned several things about the product itself and also your transition, quote unquote, from a normal CEO to be CEO that leads a remote team, right? Um, how many of the things that you've learned during that transition part affects your decision on affects your product decisions on developing Remo? For example, when you realize that, okay, trust is super important, and that's why you want to build a more social aspect of Remo. Basically, is there any learnings?
So, I mean, there's a few. So the first one is like trust can be better established if the managers can actually see what people are
Mhm.
doing. So, but not seeing someone like 100% what they're doing. So I'll give you an example. When you're at work, right, and
Right.
you walk by someone, you don't like go and like peer over their screen and look at what they're doing,
Hmm.
right? You don't do that, but you do feel that they're working. And from a
Got it.
manager standpoint, you feel that they're working is like, well, their back is towards you, they're clicking, maybe they're on a phone call, maybe they're, most managers, if you hire well, like you know that they either don't go on Facebook, or you're okay with that because you trust them, that you
Right.
know what they're doing. So I try to like replicate that in Remo. So for example, in Remo, you can see when people are talking, when people are typing, and when people have turned their video or share screen on.
Ah.
So it's really exciting to see a group of your teammates in a room with share screen video on. Like, it's just an icon on top of their avatar, circle avatars. I don't actually see their screen. It's just an icon to show that they're sharing their screen.
Got it.
And that is that, and we also have another icon is when they're talking, like that there'll be like an icon showing that their mouth would move,
Mm-hmm.
like an icon showing that they're talking, like a
Mm-hmm.
little yellow icon of an emoji. And
Mm-hmm.
that changed everything, because then now I have this feeling that people are working. It's such a superficial thing, like
Right.
managers shouldn't be saying that. They should be
Yeah.
trusting them. But
Yeah.
it I think it's partially that, like, you see them working, but I think the second thing is that you see feedback. Like,
Got
it's
it.
just, you see things going on. Like, you don't know exactly what they're working. They could not be working. They could be talking about, like, random stuff, but
Right.
you see things happening. It builds up that feeling that, like, hey, you know what, we're doing great stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. And the second thing is, kind of asking people how they are, like doing like check-ins for that. So we're developing a beta, a feature where people can kind of write in very quickly, like what they've been up to, what they're doing. Like, for example, what is their favorite Game of Thrones character? And it's kind of like a very short Twitter update,
Right.
right? And this Twitter update kind of pops up like very rarely on the map. And so you can kind of see what people are, what they answered on a certain question, for that question of the day, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see those questions. And you can also like see like their emojis. So it's kind of like a status update, but it's a status update on a specific contextual topic.
Got it. Yeah.
And that contextual topic drives conversations, and it also allows you to feel more empathetic to people, to say, hey, maybe you're not in a good mood, what's happening at home, and allows you to start those conversations with people so that you can ask and understand, oh, maybe they have a lot of things going on at home, therefore that's impacting work. Okay, what's going on? What's the context behind that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Even though when we say on remote team, trust 100% important, right? Like you just mentioned, like, as a manager or as a leader, you should be able to trust your team member that they are actually doing stuff. But in my mind, like you mentioned, that you with Remo, you can actually see that this person is sharing a screen and this person is having a video call with another person. It To me, it seems like you're giving the right amount of transparency without being invasive.
Yes, that's right.
Like the most invasive one is, okay, I want to track your monitor, so that's the worst thing ever. But the least invasive one is just like, oh, you're online on Slack, you're probably working. But especially when you're like new, new leaders in the remote team, you probably can't feel that enough. But with Remo, it can give you the right amount of transparency. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for Remo, one of the things that we really value is that remote work is that you can do the things that you want to do whenever you want, and you're able to have the privacy. Like nobody wants invasive tracking, and so we have definitely don't feel that is the solution to everything. However, it's how do you balance the right amount of transparency so that it doesn't make people uncomfortable with that. And I think that's what we're trying to do, and that's what our map allows us to do. And that's actually our biggest differentiator, is this map. This map allows us to bring in a lot of these type of elements that make people feel better, more transparency. Other tools out there, they can't afford that. They're unable to do that. It's just text, or it's just a chat box with a bunch of names on it, and you have to manually update like your status on it. Like those are all good stuff. It's all great. I think that works for a lot of teams, and that is the way how we differentiate ourselves.
Right. So for the office map, you actually can design the office yourself.
Yeah. We have a package where like you can design your office, and then we can then set it up for you. Yes.
You should sell like a office template that sells like offices from certain sitcoms or something like that, like the office from Simpsons, a cool idea. Or The Office. That'll be interesting. Like, okay.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Right. Yeah. So what's next for Remo? What's your next product roadmap, or events or activities that you're planning right now?
So with respect to Remo, like a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now is really related, going more into like the social aspect of the remote workplace, I guess you could say. Like, how do you make people connect better? And we're really, really focused on that, on the connection between people, and how to like create natural conversations, how to make people feel more comfortable in sharing or participating in events within the company. So we're really, really focused on that type of aspect. And the second thing we're focusing on is like doing more events. So we're doing a lot more events now. We have an event coming up this week, and with Product Hunt, we have another event next week for remote working as well.
Oh, cool.
Which you guys are a part of, actually, which CodeMentor, ARC is a part of. And so we're doing a lot of online events.
Got it. Yeah, that's super interesting. Right. So my last question for this interview, some of our listeners or audience out there are probably startup founders or CEOs or even managers that want to try to hire remote team members, mostly core team members or even contractor, but they probably are still hesitate to take the step, because they're afraid you don't know how to manage people remotely. Is there any advice from you to them to make sure that the transition to be a remote leader much more smoother?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I think like the first thing is, as a leader, you should definitely work remotely for a few days. Like you should try to work remotely a few days. Even if you have team members in the office, you should tell you and your whole team to work remotely for maybe 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and then slowly ramp it up to 4 or 5 days a week, and have the whole team kind of realize what it's like to work remotely, and use that as a baseline and say, this is what it's like, and we need to be remote first. If that is the goal, to be remote first. And then that gives everybody that feeling and understanding. And then the second part is to build trust within your employees by having, deep conversations about expectations. Here are the expectations. Here are the rules. This is what I expect from you. Making sure those expectations are very clear. I do have a transition template that helps people transition from a normal like co-located company to a remote company.
Oh, cool.
And it gives you all of the documents that you need to prepare. It tells you all the documents you need to prepare. It tells you these are the things that you need to do. And it's something where it gives you even a timeline of how to do it. And also, if your company is really big, for example, and you want to transition to a fully remote team, it's also that. So if you're just hiring, there's a lot of stuff in there that you can definitely pull out. So for example, communication protocols, all these documents, all they do is they just set the expectations between the manager and the employee, or the team member, so that they all understand that these are the expectations that are being set. Whether you follow them or not is up to the company itself, and whether you want to, but at least there's something written on paper where people can look at, because that's all that's all there is in a remote world. If it's not written on paper and it's talked about, it's very difficult to communicate to a team if you just verbally say it. It's very difficult. And that's when a case where Slack is useful, where you have policies, you have announcements. Slack is great for that because it's on paper, it's on writing, it's in words. And that's the point where Slack is really, Slack or chat is really good. So I would say that. And then to kind of make that jump, I would also say to hire remote full-time member is to make sure that when you hire your first person, you really need to kind of work hard making sure that you connect with that person on a personal level. So having a one-on-one chat with that person, or the manager to have that one-on-one chat with that person on a weekly basis. I think that's pretty important. Very, very important. Usually people should be doing that when you're working in a co-located office, but sometimes people don't do that for whatever reason, maybe they don't have time, or maybe the team is not big enough. But for a remote team member, you should always do it no matter what the size of the team is. I got burned because I did not build a deep enough connection with a remote team member, and then they left. Because they didn't feel that they were part of the team. They didn't feel anything. They were just this one person in the clouds, and it just wasn't good. So
they can feel like a second-class citizen, especially when it's co-located. For the template that you mentioned, is this something that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I can definitely share that template with the audience for sure.
Yeah, we'll definitely share it on our show notes, and also retweet it on our social media if you don't mind.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, cool. Ho Yin, thank you so much for your time today. I actually learned a lot, and it's a very fascinating talk. So for the listener out there, where can they find you online?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. If they search for, actually, you can find me on Twitter. It's just Ho Yin C, HOYINC. And also LinkedIn, I can give you the links as well for that.
Right, awesome. Ho Yin, thank you so much for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Jovian. This was great. This was fun.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
And that's it for another episode of Outside the Valley, brought to you by ARC. We created this podcast with the hope that in each episode, you can learn something new from other remote startup people. So if you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at jovian@arc.dev. It's VIAN at arc.dev. Or you can find us on Twitter at arc.dev. See you next week with another episode of Outside the Valley, and ciao. So again, can you elaborate more to our audience? What is Remo? And then, sorry, blah, blah, blah. Let me cut this up. Yeah. Okay. So, 3, 2, 1.